Lord of all creation, of water, earth, and sky. The heavens are your tabernacle. Glory to the Lord on high.
God of wonders beyond our galaxy, you are holy, holy. The universe declares your majesty. You are holy, holy, Lord of heaven and earth, Lord of heaven and earth.
Early in the morning, I will celebrate the light. When I stumble in the darkness, I will call your name by night.
God of wonders beyond our galaxy, you are holy, holy. The universe declares your majesty. You are holy, holy, Lord of heaven and earth, Lord of heaven and earth.
Lord,
Hallelujah, hallelujah, God of wonders beyond our galaxy, you are holy, holy. The universe declares your majesty. You are holy, holy. God of wonders beyond our galaxy, you are holy, holy. The universe declares your majesty. You are holy, holy.
Lord,
Hallelujah, hallelujah, God of wonders beyond our galaxy, you are holy, holy. The universe declares your majesty. You are holy, holy. God of wonders beyond our galaxy, you are holy, holy. The universe declares your majesty. You are holy, holy, Lord of heaven and earth. Trials dark on every hand, and we cannot understand all the ways that God will lead us to that blessed promised land. But He'll guide us with His eye, and we'll follow till we die. We will understand it better by and by and by.
And we're singing,
By and by, when the morning comes,
you know,
all the saints of God are gathering home. We will tell the story We will understand it better by and by.
We're singing
By and by, when the morning comes.
You know
All the saints of God are gathering home. We will tell the story how we've overcome. We will understand it better by and by. Temptations in its snares often take us unawares, and our hearts are made to bleed for some thoughtless word or deed. And we wonder why the test when we try to do our best. We will understand it better by and by.
we're singing
By and by, when the morning comes.
You know
All the saints of God are gathering home. We will tell the story how we've overcome. We will understand it better by and by.
And we're singing
By and by, when the morning comes.
You know
All the saints of God are gathering home. We will tell the story how we've overcome. We will understand it better by and by. Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of Him in glory will the toils of life repay. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory.
Hi, I'm Steve Hemphill. Thank you for letting me come into your house today and talk to you about something very exciting. Heaven. We don't talk about heaven very much, do we? It's our goal as a Christian, and we don't really talk about it a lot. When you think about it, why does an Olympic athlete work so hard, exercise so hard, train so hard every day, and have the ability to self-discipline themselves all during the years of training for the Olympics? What motivates them? It's picturing standing on that stand, that podium at the end of their event in that gold medal position, with the whole world hearing their national anthem and the tears rolling down their face. What's our goal as a Christian? It's heaven. And really, we don't even talk about it. Well, I want to share with you how I became highly motivated to learn about heaven, what the Bible had to say about heaven. My dad died at age 69. He was a very godly man, and he was the mayor of our small hometown in Central Texas where I grew up. He died suddenly with a heart attack, and he had just gotten a checkup. The doctor said he was fine, and he dropped dead with a massive heart attack. And after the funeral, my little brother and I, Kendall, helped my mom, and we were looking for the will. Dad had an old safe in the back of his office, and we figured that's where the will was. So we started digging in that safe, and we found this thick sealed envelope from Dad. But on the outside, he had written, "If you boys find this after I'm dead, do not open this envelope. It is not important. Destroy this envelope without opening it." Now, what would you do? Most places I go, people tell me they'd open it. A few tell me they'd get their best friend to open it and tell them what was in it. That way they didn't disobey, but they found out what they wanted to know. We're sort of conniving. We justify the things that we really want to do, don't we? Well, after agonizing about it for a while, we decided that since there's a resurrection and we're going to face Dad again one day, we wanted him to be proud of us. We didn't want to have to hang our head next time we saw him and say, "Sorry, Dad, we couldn't help ourselves." We wanted him to be proud. So we burned it without reading it. And if you want to know what was in that envelope and you beat me to heaven, you can ask him when you get there. Dad's name is Jamie Hemphill. But that event, that day, made me realize that I'd been in church all my life and never heard a sermon on heaven and what heaven was really like, what the Bible said about heaven. So after the funeral and coming back home, I went to the Bible bookstore and asked for the heaven section. And the lady laughed at me. In 2000, when he died, there wasn't a single book in their store about heaven. I couldn't find any books about heaven. Everything about heaven came out way later. Yes, there might have been some old books I could have traced down on Amazon or something that weren't in print anymore from years ago, but I was looking for a verse-by-verse study of what the Bible said about heaven, and I couldn't find that. So I bought a new Bible and prayed a new prayer, and I want to share it with you because it works. I said, "Lord, I'm rereading the Scriptures, and this time I'm looking for heaven. Please help me to find it. What does your word say about heaven?" And I found so many things about heaven that no one was talking about. And that's what led to this study and this book. My first book is called My Search for the Real Heaven. I began with this simple question, what if the Bible means what it says? And I reread the Bible looking for heaven, asking God to show me. Now, as I studied, and you'll see these in my slides that I share in just a moment, as I show you a few of the verses I found, these are the color code system I use in my studies. I use black for God or Jesus. I use red for sin, spiritual warfare, demons, evil. I use green for prophecy, blue for heaven, angels, or eternity. And then especially the bottom two, burgundy for the literal nature of Scripture, and brown for covenant things, covenant connections. But first I want to say that heaven is not a salvation issue. We might not all agree on every aspect of heaven, but if we're not excited about heaven, I think it kills the spirit of evangelism. If you're not excited about where you're going, you're not going to take people with you, right? Now, we all know a few verses about heaven. There's a street of gold, and that comes from Revelation 21:21. I heard a story once about a guy who got a visit from an angel one night. And the angel said, "I have good news and bad news. The bad news is you have one day left. I'm coming to get you tomorrow night. Your time is up. But the good news is we're going to make an exception to the normal rule and allow you to bring one suitcase with you to heaven." So the next day, the guy sold everything he had and converted it to gold bricks. And he put them in a suitcase at the foot of his bed. Sure enough, the angel showed up at night and said, "Let's go." And he took the suitcase with him, and the angel dropped him off at the front gate where Peter was checking people in. And when he got up to the front of the line, Peter checked his name and said, "Yes, you're on the list. Come on in, but you have to leave the suitcase outside. No earthly possessions in here. You understand?" And the guy said, "Well, no. The angel said I was going to be an exception to the rule, and I was going to be allowed to bring this suitcase." And Peter said, "Really? Can I see what's in it?" And he looked in, and then he said, "Pavement? You brought pavement?" It's all perspective, isn't it? The things that we value the most here, gold. In heaven, You just walk on it. Streets of gold. I want to share a couple of stories as we start about God's hand in this study. Because the things that began to happen around me is something I can't make happen, and I can't make it up. First, a man called me from church who I barely knew and said, God told me to tell you something. You're supposed to write a book about your dad. Promise me you'll do it. And I didn't know how to respond to that. I think I thought God was the great I used to could, but he calls himself the I am because he still does. I sort of ignored that. A year later, another guy called and told me basically the same thing. So I realized I need to do this. And so I tried to take my color codes you saw and turn them into chapters about rewards and resurrection, and I'll share some of that in a moment. But I also prayed a strange prayer. You know, it's not easy to get published. But I didn't know how hard it was to get published until I started trying to get published. They have a special name for my writing. It's called an unsolicited manuscript. You know what that means? That means they ain't asked for it and they not fixing to. That's what that means. Well, I prayed that if I had misunderstood the Bible and misunderstood all these passages about heaven, that God would make sure that I did not get published because I didn't want to mislead anyone. Teachers are kept to a higher standard. And so when I submitted it to a publisher, I had a contract offer in 48 hours. I took that as a God thing and that I should go ahead and move forward. And you know, their contract even had a statement of faith in it. And the last page of the contract said, we believe in the Bible as the inerrant Word of God. We believe Jesus is the only way to heaven. We believe in the Lord's Supper and we believe in baptism. You ever seen baptism in a contract? Me either. I also had a strange thing happen in that when my book was published, a Christian university asked me to come speak on their lectureship program in Arkansas. And I was the only guy on the program that had a BA in marketing. Everybody else had a PhD in theology. It was sort of like Sesame Street, where you ask, which one of these things doesn't fit with the others? You know, I was the one that didn't fit. So they all had big auditoriums for keynote speeches, and I had a little classroom that seated 15 or 16 people, but 120 people showed up to hear all about heaven, and they had to move me to the chapel to seat everyone. And one of the young ladies who came that day is Sue Park. She was a foreign exchange student from South Korea. She sat through all 3 of my lectures and then bought my book on heaven. Later we got to talk. She said, Mr. Hemphill, I want you to know something. I was raised in a family who was atheists in South Korea, and I got accepted in the foreign exchange program, and I got put with a Christian family in South Texas. And they went to church every Sunday, and I just didn't want to stay home by myself, so I went to church with them. But I would listen to the preacher, and I became a Christian, and I was baptized, and now I'm at a Christian university. But I want you to know that I was scared of heaven. I was scared to die and go to heaven because I did not want to become a floating ghost. Now, by the way, the Bible doesn't teach you'll be a floating ghost, but a lot of people think that. But she was so scared of heaven that she told me she kept a list of questions about heaven in her Bible. Now, let me pause just a second and tell you that when I realized I needed to write this book, because God was sending me people saying, you know, you need to write this book about heaven and about your dad, I started praying that God would give me the chapters and the order they should go in, the chapter titles and the order they should go in, because I didn't feel qualified to write this book. One night I woke up about 3 in the morning, and it was like I was listening to a recorded message. Chapter 1 is this, chapter 2 is this, chapter 3 is this. That's how I got the chapters and their titles. I can tell you I'm not smart enough to have come up with this. So I got up and wrote it on a sticky note, and that became the chapters and titles in the book. So later, when this young lady from South Korea, Sue Park, explained to me that she was scared to die and become a floating ghost, she said she kept a list of questions about heaven in her Bible all the time, and anytime the subject of heaven ever came up, she would pull those questions out of her Bible and look to see if any of the answers were being given. She said, I never even found one of the answers from anyone else on that list until I read your book and heard your lectures. She said, Mr. Hemphill, I want you to know something. Your book answered every question on my list in the same order. I had them written down. Chapter 1 answered question 1. Chapter 2 answered question 2. Let me tell you something, folks. Only God can do that. Only God. So hopefully I can give you a quick overview in this short lesson that'll get you excited about heaven so that maybe you'll also share your faith and take some people with you to heaven. I can't talk about the whole book. I spent 7 years, 2 hours a day doing my research, but this is an overview of just a few minutes of that. First of all, I talked about literal versus symbolic. See, the Bible wants us to think of the Bible as myths or stories or fairy tales, just like Cinderella. And they want us to think it's a good book, a good piece of literature, but it's not the literal Word of God with literal truth in it. And so I realized that was the first important lesson that needed to be taught. Matthew 18:3 is one of the most shocking verses I saw in the Bible about heaven as I did my study. It says, "Unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter heaven." Now that's sort of a shocking statement when you think about it. Jesus says you can't go to heaven unless you learn to think like a child. And so I got to thinking about that. How does a child take a Bible story? If you tell them the story of creation, what would they believe? That on day one, God made this, and day two, God made this. If you told a child the story of David and Goliath, what would they believe? Goliath was really 9 feet tall, and David killed him with one stone in a slingshot. This is me in the first grade, and Ms. Reardon was my teacher, and on Monday we had to turn in our milk money, which was a quarter. It cost a nickel a day to get milk, and you could get chocolate milk too for a nickel. And so on Mondays we'd turn in our quarter, and we could get milk all week long, all 5 days of the week at break time. So the bus started honking, and I ran to Mom and said, "Mom, I need my quarter for milk money." She opened her change purse. Guess what? She was out of quarters. And so she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, I don't have any quarters." And I said, "Mom, you don't understand. I'm not going to get milk all week if you don't come up with a quarter right now, and the bus is honking." So she dug frantically in the bottom of her purse, and sure enough, a quarter had fallen out of her change purse down into the big purse. So she handed it to me, and she said, "Okay, here's your quarter, but don't lose it. I don't have any more." So I took it to Ms. Reardon, and I said, "Ms. Reardon, here's my milk money, but I want you to know my family is flat busted. This is our last quarter. Mom said we didn't have any more." You see, children take things literally, don't they? Matthew Maury was born in 1806, and he read this verse from Psalm 8, 6-8, that says, "God made paths in the sea." And he thought about that and said, "There's paths in the sea? I would like to find them." He ended up joining the Navy, and eventually he became the superintendent of charts. And he required every Navy vessel every day to record their longitude and latitude and the direction of the current. And he ended up compiling that information to write a book called The Physical Geography of the Sea. And we were able to get our ships, our bullets, our men, and our supplies there quicker in World War I and World War II because we knew the paths in the sea. They still use that book today. And that came about only because Matthew Fontaine Maury read the Bible and took it literally. I think that's fascinating. On that theme, one of the chapters in my book on heaven is about prophecies of heaven. And I feel like prophecy gives us hints of heaven. And you have to remember that the essence of prophecy is to be a witness for Jesus Christ. See, that's why prophecy is in the Bible. Only the true God can predict the future and be right 100% of the time. And if you think about it, there are two main categories of prophecy in the Bible. The first one is first coming prophecies. The second main category is second coming prophecies. There's two comings. He came once as a suffering servant. He's coming back as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so, since prophecies about Jesus concern both comings, I thought if I can decipher how many of the first coming prophecies are literal, then that'll help me understand how to take the second coming prophecies that are about heaven and our new body and our eternity with God. And so I spent months and months going through all the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and recording each prophecy and which of them were literal and which were symbolic. And honestly, I figured it was about 50-50 when I began that journey. But I was very shocked to learn that the first coming prophecies were 100% literal. Now think about that for a second. That's a drastic statement. All the first coming prophecies about Jesus were literal. He was literally born of a virgin. He was betrayed by a friend. He was killed by his own, rejected by his own. He was 30 pieces of silver was used for being betrayed by a friend. He was buried in a rich man's tomb, not a bone broken, rise in 3 days, led as a lamb to slaughter. Now, yes, a lamb is a symbol, but he was literally slaughtered, wasn't he? And so I've yet to find a first coming prophecy that was only symbolic. There were some symbols in there, but just because there's symbol in there doesn't mean there's not a literal side to it. So that was a big shock to me. And that helped me rethink heaven and eternity with God and the second coming prophecies. Because as I thought about that, I realized if 100% of the first coming prophecies are literal, what if the second coming prophecies are also all literal? And I reread the Bible with that thought in mind, and so many things made sense that were very confusing before. Now, I'll come back to that in a minute. But I have a section on Satan's strategy against heaven. I love how it's worded in the message of Ephesians 6, verse 12. This is no afternoon athletic contest that we'll walk away from and forget about in a couple of hours. This is for keeps. A life or death fight to the finish against the devil and all his angels. Our true enemy is unseen. Now, as far as Satan's strategy against heaven, the main thing is he wants us to think of heaven as dull and boring and unexciting. Because if we're not excited about heaven, we're not going to be evangelistic and take people with us, right? So that alone should motivate us to get excited about studying a little bit about heaven. Other thing that came up as I studied is that God said he was going to destroy the earth with water, which he did with the flood. 2 Peter 3, 5-6 says earth was destroyed with water. So if earth was destroyed, what planet are we living on now? You see, it didn't mean annihilation. It meant purification. The flood destroyed the godless, but not the godly. See? He says in that same chapter he's going to destroy it with fire next time. It's been reserved and preserved by God to be destroyed by fire. And it also teaches really that fire is going to destroy the godless, but not the godly. Judgment fires are going to test and expose everyone's work. This is from 1 Corinthians 3, verse 13. The day will appear with fire, and the fire will test everyone's work to show what sort of work it was. And the judgment fires will test our work to see if the work has value. And then it says in verse 14 that if the work survives the fire, that will be rewarded for those works. Okay? So good deeds done for the right reason will survive the fire and will be rewarded. He rewards the deeds that survive. Now see, I can put a big check in the contribution every week just so I can brag about it. But if I do that, that's my whole reward. I won't get any more reward. But if I don't let the right hand know what the left hand's doing, and if I'm quiet about my contribution, then there's rewards for that. And God knows our motivation for the rewards we do. So the deeds that survive the fire will be rewarded. So do your good deeds, but be quiet about it. Let God reward you later. Don't brag about it yourself. Also, it says that I have a whole chapter on our resurrection and our new eternal body. It said God raised the Lord to life. He will also raise us to life. The word resurrection means a literal return to life from death. It means dead tissue coming back to life. Now, I will tell you, I've been surprised to learn as I've traveled around the country and spoken on heaven that many Christians believe in eternity, but they no longer believe in a resurrection. Now, let me repeat that. Many Christians sitting in churches today believe in eternity, but they don't believe in a resurrection. You know, they made fun of Paul for teaching resurrection, but that's what the truth of the Bible teaches, that we will be resurrected. The dead in their grave will hear the voice of God. Even the sea will give up its dead. So I have a whole chapter on that, and I think it's very important to realize the word for resurrection is a Latin word that means a literal return to life from death. And then the body teaches that we'll be resurrected, we'll meet him in the air, and we'll be transformed into immortals, 1 Thessalonians 4. Also, I've got a section, I wish I had more time to talk about God's rewards. I always thought the rewards that God would give in eternity would be the same for everyone, or socialistic, so to speak. But actually, that's not in the Bible. I found hundreds of verses, literally, that talk about the rewards will be based on your deeds. The Father will honor and reward anyone who serves me. over and over. Remember the parable about the two faithful servants. One doubled his talent from 5 to 10, from 1 to 2, and he doubled his. And one got in charge of 10 cities and one 5. It wasn't equal. It was based on their deeds and how they used their own abilities. That's how God rewards, and he's the judge of that. The only parable in the Bible that seems to be contradicting that is the one that had the landowner hire different workers during the day, and the ones at the end of the day got the same wages as the ones who started early in the morning. But I think that has to do with salvation, not rewards, because then it would contradict all these other verses that say they're based on your deeds. And so if you become a Christian at age 10 or at age 110, you still get to go to heaven. And I think that's what that parable is illustrating. Another very interesting thing, and I want to talk about this a little bit at the end here, is connecting the dots with New Earth. There's 3 big passages on New Earth in the Bible. Isaiah 65 and 66, 1 Peter 3, and the last 2 chapters in the Bible, Revelation 21 and 22. And many details are given about New Earth, but I've never in my life heard a sermon in church about New Earth. Isaiah 66:20 says a new earth will never disappear. It's eternal. So we're going to be eternal, and there's going to be a new earth that's eternal. I find that interesting. And that led to a whole nother study about what I call 5 earths in Scripture. There was an original earth, then there was a cursed earth, then it changed drastically when we had the flood, so we live on the 3rd one, the post-flood earth. Then there's going to be a restored earth and a new earth. Let me show you the verses quickly as we wrap up. The original earth is mentioned first in Genesis 1:31. God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was very good. Now, Aristotle, many centuries ago, started teaching that if it was physical, it was evil, because everything physical is evil. So heaven must be an ethereal experience, a spirit only. Just your spirit will be. But the Bible teaches in the beginning that everything was tangible, and yet it was very good. So the fact that it's tangible or intangible has nothing to do with whether or not it's good. Also, in the first original good earth, there were animals all around Adam and Eve and God. And so it was a very unique place. You didn't have to work for food, but then the cursed earth came along because God blocked the way to the tree of life after Adam and Eve sinned and disobeyed, and the ground was cursed, and it brought many changes. Now there's way increased pain in childbirth. Now there's thorns on rose bushes, thorns and thistles. Now there's you have to work for food. So there's many differences in the cursed earth than there was in the original perfect earth where they could walk with God face to face. And then, as I said, we live on the 3rd one. There have been a great flood, and the flood removed the water canopy above the sky that would have protected us from ultraviolet rays. And many changes in the atmosphere have happened because we've had the flood. The underground waters erupted, and the mighty rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky, Genesis 7, verse 11. Also, when after the flood, God gave the fear of man, Genesis 9, the fear of man into the wild animals, and he gave us meat to eat. So there was no meat eaters before the flood. Therefore, the Garden of Eden was a big petting zoo. You could hug a T-Rex. You could pet a lion. You could lay down with a giraffe or with a bear, and there was no danger because there were no meat eaters. The animals ate grain and grass, and people ate grain and fruit. There were no meat eaters. And so that leads me to a restored earth. God plans to restore things. In fact, this is one of them, but there's 2 big passages in the Bible, actually 3, that talk about a restored earth. Romans 8:21 says all creation looks forward to the day it'll join God's children in freedom from death and decay. That's the creation being restored along with the people being resurrected and restored. Also, Acts 3:21 says that Jesus must remain in heaven until the time for the final restoration of all things as God promised long ago through the prophets. In one passage in Mark, Jesus says, when all things are made new, so that's his plan, to make all things new. And then we have new earth. Now, many people ask, what's the difference between a restored earth and new earth? Well, one thing is the size. It's way, way, way bigger than the current earth. Our current earth, the biggest city in the world is, maybe New York City. The dimensions of the new earth, capital city, are given in Scripture in detail. And it talks about it being 1,400 miles square. That's the difference from New York City to El Paso, Texas, and from Canada to Mexico. And that's just the base of the city. It's also 1,400 miles high. It's only 500 miles to outer space now, where there's no more breathable atmosphere. So New Earth will be way, way bigger than the original. So the New Earth details, which we won't have time to go over now, is that it's going to be so great, he'll make us forget the old ones. We'll be filled. It's a world filled with righteousness. Think about that. Pick up today's newspaper and take out all the articles that have someone violating the Ten Commandments. What do you have left? Not much, right? But this is talking about a world filled with righteousness where every story is a good story. There'll be water, lakes and rivers, streams, but no oceans. The godly people will live forever in the land. God knew what language to use. The godly are going to be on earth forever. Everyone on earth will know God. It'll be a place of complete safety, a place of holiness. Jesus will rule. He'll bring our rewards. Creation will be eternal with never-ending rejoicing. And there'll be no pain or danger at all. Jesus will bring peace. He'll eliminate war. We'll have banquets and fellowship with all the godly people. We have rewards given in proportion to deeds. And Jesus has given the universe for his inheritance. God's people will rule on the earth. Revelation 5:10 is the last slide here. Christians are going to reign on the earth. You have made them to be a kingdom of priests to our God, and they will reign upon the earth. So that's the 5 Earths in the Bible, and it made it interesting to tie that in with the scriptures about heaven and eternity. So I hope these ideas about heaven have been encouraging and uplifting to you and get you excited to, number 1, reread your Bible about heaven, and number 2, get excited and share your faith with other people. Thanks for letting me into your home today.
We will see the holy city come descending like a bride, with the Lamb of glory seated on his throne. A new earth and a new heaven, with its gates thrown open wide, when the King of Zion comes to claim his own. Till your kingdom comes in power, saints and angels shout amen. Father, we will be your kingdom until then. Then the Son will raise a scepter filled with righteousness and peace, saying there is no more sorrow, no more night, and the chains will all be broken, no more hunger, no disease, only freedom when the darkness turns to light, till your kingdom comes in power, saints and angels shout amen. Father, we will be your kingdom until then. Let us be a holy nation, known for justice and for grace. Let our love and mercy testify for you. We will share the hope of Jesus until all will see his face, when the perfect comes and all will be made new. Till your kingdom comes in power, saints and angels shout amen. Father, we will be your kingdom until kingdom until then. Who is like you, Lord, in all the earth? Matchless love and beauty, endless worth. For nothing in this world will satisfy. Jesus, you're the cup that won't run dry. Your presence is heaven to me. Your presence is heaven to me. Treasure of my heart and of my soul. In my weakness you are merciful. Redeemer of my past and present wrong. Holder of my future days to come. Your presence is heaven to me. Your presence is heaven to me. Oh Jesus, your presence is heaven to me. Oh Jesus, your presence is heaven to me. All my days on earth I will await the moment that I see you face to face. For nothing in this world will satisfy. Jesus, you're the cup that won't run dry. Your presence is heaven to me. Your presence is heaven to me. Your presence is heaven to me. Your presence is heaven to me.
Hi, I'm Melissa Lancaster and I want to welcome you to Praise and Harmony TV. Here on this app or website, whichever you're using, you'll find countless videos on how to sing, vocal care, music theory, training for individual songs and learning harmony parts, music videos and lyric videos for your church to stream, children's content, and so much more. We are adding new content every day, so be sure to take a look around and be sure to sign up for your 3-day free trial.
All of the glory.
Announcing Praise and Harmony TV. P&H TV is the inspirational way to fill your life with music videos of brand new songs of worship and hymns. P&H TV also provides masterclass education for beginners to learn fundamentals of music, as well as the quickest method to easily learn how to sing harmony, featuring hundreds of videos which isolate one harmony voice part at a time for ease of learning.
I know the Lord will find a way for me.
Hear fascinating history of classic hymns of the faith. Enjoy videos of Christian singing group Acappella, including vintage material from The Vault.
We bow down and we crown you the the King we
Be blessed by full-length music videos of the International Ministry of the Praise and Harmony Singers. Share children's videos as well as songs for teens by Regen Harmony. Praise and Harmony TV also features documentaries of behind-the-scenes events, including a specialized podcast for song leaders.
There were no God.
P&H TV contains resources for a wide variety of assemblies, including videos specifically designed for worship services, weddings, funerals, and special holiday events. New content will be added every month. Sign up today for the annual plan and save big money. Praise and Harmony TV is here.